We are fully aware of the fact that Russia is much bigger in terms of size, resources, and manpower. So we knew that we would have to come up with the asymmetrical methods of warfare we'll have to fight a smart war. And this is exactly what we're doing. And that operation, the spiderweb operation, which destroyed 1/3 of Russian strategic bombers, is proof of this ingenuity. I mean, it's been planned for more than a year and a half, and the results are absolutely stunning.
Ukraine is another big one. It's shown its military ingenuity in the past few days, using underwater explosives on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea, and before that, of course, attacking Russia's long-range bomber bases with those smuggled drones. But the bridge seems to have already reopened, so what's really going on behind the scenes? Yuriy Sak is an advisor to the Minister of Strategic Industries of Ukraine, and he joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate.
Let's start with that bridge attack. What has happened here, and has it been a success? Because obviously, I imagine that you would have hoped that the bridge would have been completely destroyed, but it seems to have been reopened.
Yes, so that bridge, first of all, it's a very symbolic bridge for Russia and for the leader of Russia, because it connects the illegally annexed Crimea with the mainland Russia. It's a bridge across which Russia is resupplying their arms, their army, in particular in the south of the Kherson region. So, and it's been the third attack on that bridge. Of course, that structure is very well protected, and the Russians always say, even a few days ago there was a big security conference here in Odessa in Ukraine, and even experts who are pro-Ukrainian, they all said that it's impossible to again attack that bridge. But we have proven that with a little bit of ingenuity and good planning, it is possible. Yesterday that bridge was temporarily out of action. Of course, we have not destroyed it entirely, but again, we have just shown that there are cracks in the Russian protection systems, and they will be exploited going forward by us.
And is that the point of what we're seeing now from Ukraine? Because the mission to attack Russia's long-range bomber bases was incredibly successful by all accounts. As you said, the bridge potentially not so much, but a PR success maybe, or that's certainly how I think you would like us to see it. Is this part of a new strategy from Ukraine to show you might think it's impossible, but actually for us it is still possible?
Well, we have said it from the very beginning of the large-scale invasion that we are fully aware of the fact that Russia is much bigger in terms of size, resources, and manpower. So we knew that we would have to come up with the asymmetrical methods of warfare we'll have to fight a smart war. And this is exactly what we're doing. And that operation, the spiderweb operation, which destroyed 1/3 of Russian strategic bombers, is proof of this ingenuity. I mean, it's been planned for more than a year and a half, and the results are absolutely stunning. But of course, we're very proud of our special services, of course, and those planes, those aircraft that have been destroyed, they've been taken out of action now, and they will no longer be used to launch missiles on Ukraine. And they have been even recently, right? But at the same time, we have to focus on rallying for more diplomatic pressure on Russia, because the war continues. The situation along some parts of the front line is intensifying, and going forward, more sanctions need to be applied on Russia from all of our partners, European, America, so that Russia is unable to prosecute this war and will sit down at the negotiating table and talk meaningfully about peace.
And I'll come to that question about negotiation in just a moment, but concluding this discussion about your recent actions, have you seen, or are you expecting, or are you worried about a similar reaction from Russia?
If not similar, but of course we understand that every time something like this happens, Russians retaliate. And unlike us, as you have seen that even in operations such as this one, we are targeting only military targets. This is allowed by international law, by all the Geneva Conventions, and this is why we're civilized. So, of course, we are expecting some form of retaliation. This is why in the recent days, the government of Ukraine is warning people that the moment you hear an air raid siren, please go to the bomb shelter, because, it is not clear how Russians will respond, but we are on, high alert.
Yeah, so take it seriously, in other words. And you're expecting, it sounds there, an attack on civilians potentially, not an attack on military hardware.
Well, they always attack civilians. They even when they claim that they were aiming at the military targets, but kindergartens, schools, hotels, living apartments. It's been just few days actually before the spiderweb operation, the night before the spiderweb operation, they have launched an attack, the largest drone attack, almost 500 drones at different Ukrainian cities. So.
Yeah.
We can expect that now they will use even more firepower.
You mentioned diplomacy. The White House says it's open to the idea of a summit between the presidents of Russia, Ukraine, and America. Would you be in favour of such a meeting if it could try and solve this war, end the war?
Okay, so our president said it many times. We are comfortable with any format that Russians would take seriously, because what we're seeing now is a very obscure delegation shows up every time in Istanbul, people with no powers, with no authority to actually sign any meaningful deals, and they just are delaying these peace talks, and essentially the Istanbul meetings have turned by now into meetings about prisoners of war exchange, which is also a very important thing for us because we value the life of every Ukrainian, and if we can bring back more Ukrainians from the captivity, it's a very important thing for us. But we are seeing that Russians do not take this format seriously, and that's why we actually believe that the way forward is for the leaders to meet, for our president to meet the president of Russian Federation, maybe in conjunction with the president of the US, and maybe that will move things from where they are now. Because for now, the talks seem to be stalled. It's just, like I said, it's just about the prisoners of war exchange.
Yeah. Yuriy Sak, many thanks for your time on the programme this morning.
Thank you.
Ukraine, they've launched an underwater attack on a major bridge between Crimea and Russian mainland. It was part of a months-long operation, according to the Ukrainian Security Service, the SBU, and comes 2 days after another significant attack on Russian air bases. Let's go through both those stories with Matthew Saville, who is Director of Military Services at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. Matthew, good evening.
Good evening.
Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton hasn't actually seen armed combat, I don't think. He was an engineer, wasn't he? But he is the man hotly tipped, set to be officially announced, but we are taking this as read this evening, according to the brilliant reporting in the Times, that he'll be the next head of the armed forces. What do we know of him? What do you make of the appointment?
Well, I mean, the first thing, of course, is that this is all yet to be confirmed, although a lot of people are reporting it and suggest an announcement is imminent. So, there are a number of good candidates. But I think that the point about the Air Chief Marshal is that he has an extensive background in the engineering side of things, the technical side of things, and critically in strategy and what's called, financial and military capability type roles. I mean, he was the most senior military officer in the MOD, one of the deputy chiefs of defence staff, who deals with financial and military capability. And what that means is that he has a very strong appreciation for actually how you build a force, how you design it, and particularly the finance and resources side of things. And if he is appointed, that is a strong set of characteristics to have for a CDS who is going to be looking how to implement this strategic defence review.
So he'll lead the MOD effectively. And just to explain this in a very sort of basic way, he is the branch, is he, that links government spending, Ministry of Defence, and then the armed forces?
He is the professional head of the armed forces, and under some reforms that have just taken place in the MOD, he is, if you like, the boss of the service chiefs. He works alongside the senior civil servant in the department, the permanent undersecretary, who's currently David Williams, and together they effectively provide policy and capability advice to the defense secretary, and the CDS is actually the military, the person who provides military advice to the prime minister.
Is there ever disconnect between what the armed forces, what the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, what they say they need and what they want, and what the government can provide? Because presumably Sir Richard Knighton, will have to navigate that. You've got the sort of hardcore military on one side with their experience of combat and battle and defensive readiness, and then you've got, yes, defensive experts, but the bean counters on the other side. All of this money is going to be freshly available. There's going to be a huge amount of nervousness, isn't there, within the MOD that it is spent correctly and appropriately.
I mean, there are military bean counters as well. I mean, you could say that the Air Chief Marshal has a background in that. There is inevitably a tension between what politicians want to do in terms of risk and what they can afford to do, and what the military can then do. And it is the job of people like the CDS and civilian policy officials to try and work out how to balance all of those competing demands. So, the military will always say, tell us what you want to achieve, and we will come up with a way of how we achieve it. But they will provide military advice that explains what that involves. And then you might find policy officials who will say, well, this is how we might, essentially translate that into new parameters for how to run an operation.
Mm. Is there ever the suggestion, and I'm digging a bit here because I remember loosely hearing a story, which I won't repeat because I can't absolutely qualify it, that effectively the armed forces carry an awful lot of weight, and the government can be quite ignorant when it comes to what should be spent where. And if the armed forces or each division says they need something and want something, then the government's often lacking in enough experience and capability to say no.
Well, there is an important dialogue, and this is the role of the Ministry of Defence as a Department of State, as well as what is called a military strategic headquarters. In other words, a place where the military advice is packaged up for ministers, to explain what is the art of the possible. I think ministers will often admit they lack knowledge on complicated military capabilities or doctrine, but in turn they might sometimes say the military aren't politically savvy enough, or they have a tendency to ask for more inevitably because they're trying to, if you like, game the system. And so an effective MOD is blending all of this to come up with realistic options for ministers. The critical thing is, you can't eliminate risk, but can you describe it and quantify it so ministers understand what choices they are making?
Understood. Let's talk about then what's happened in Russia. We saw that a terrific operation. Terrific. I mean, it was an almighty 18 months in the planning operation where lorries travelled from Ukraine into Russian territory. We saw the roofs of the lorries come off and drones fly up and attack serious airware in Russia. We also saw the destruction, or the partial destruction, or certainly an attack on Kerch Bridge today from underwater, again in Russian territory, or territory Russia would like to say is theirs. Are we seeing something new here from Ukraine? Is this anything of a turning point? Is it significant when we think about the timing of what's happening between Ukraine and Russia at the moment?
I mean, gosh, lots of questions in there. I mean, the starting point is, no, this isn't new, but what the Ukrainians are doing is taking developing technology, so that is the new bit, or rather increasingly widespread and cheap technology to conduct classic operations that you might call raids or special operations, or indeed a kind of deep strike, to disrupt the Russians, have them concerned about how safe, their rear areas are, as it were, far away from the front line, and to try and have an impact on the kind of the capability that the Russians can bring to bear. So what was attacked in the case of these aircraft is essentially the long-range bomber force of the Russians, the large aircraft that launched the long-range strikes on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure using cruise and other kinds of missiles, and do so usually out of range of Ukrainian air defenses. And they have been moved around and moved back so that they are, in theory, safer from Ukrainian attacks. And the Ukrainians are basically saying, well, nowhere is safe. We can infiltrate into Russia and get you in your home bases.
Interesting. Okay. One more for you then, as we consider where we are. Will this bridge is now already open again. I wonder how Putin will be interpreting that huge attack at the weekend, but also the additional attack of the Kerch Bridge as well.
I mean, it's difficult to get inside the mind of Putin, but I think what the message that the Ukrainians want to show is that they are capable of daring operations that threaten Russian vulnerable points or create new vulnerabilities. We've already seen the Russians now sort of rushing to search other trucks, and it snarls up their system. It distracts their intelligence services, who now have to spend more time looking for infiltrators and less time helping target Ukrainians. So I think the message that is being sent is that if you think you have the upper hand, we can still get to you. I think the counterpoint would be most of this doesn't really have a huge impact on the front line, where the Russians are still hurling large numbers of troops into play. But if you like, this is the asymmetry. So the Ukrainians are trying to get at other areas and insert doubt as to actually how secure Russia is.
Yeah, away from the battlefield, which is interesting. Look, thanks so much for being with us. I threw a lot at you there, but you did admirably. Matthew Saville, as ever, Director of Military Sciences at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. Thanks so much for being with us, Matthew. Thank you.